this title could have been anything, but the name that I gave my research is Alternative Water Access and Eco-Social Considerations. And what I did was analyze the impacts that this particular fog harvesting system in Southwest Morocco has. So this presentation has three main goals. One of them is to talk about fog harvesting and let you guys know about it, because every time I talk about it with anybody, they don't know what I'm talking about. Most of the time people think I'm saying frog harvesting, which seems even more obscure. But that, as well as presenting for the TCD community, the TCD field research grant really helped me out over the summer. So just paying it back, moving forward with the Tropilunch. And then I also will be presenting to my committee soon to defend my research. So just trying to get some practice in for that and a little bit of feedback. So I did my research in Morocco. So just to go over some things about Morocco, the average income per capita is about $3,186. About 33% of the population works in the agricultural industry, 44% in services, and 23% in industry. About 63% of the population is urban. 99% of the population is considered Arab Berber, and that is because the Arabs colonized North Africa so long ago that there is a lot of mixing, but then there's still people who generally will identify as one or the other, but the majority or a large portion of the population is some sort of a blend. 99% are Sunni Muslim. So to talk about geography a little bit, just to give you guys some background, I know usually Tropilunch is focused on more tropical places than Morocco, but here is a general map of the geography. So darker brown places are more mountainous. And this is some cool data that I found. So the net water resources in Morocco is 22,000 million cubic meters a year. And that is basically how that's added up is precipitation minus evapotranspiration. And then that is split into groundwater and surface water. So surface water takes up a majority of what's left over, but because we're talking about fog, to show this here, the majority of precipitation is lost through evapotranspiration. So that's going to become very important, right, for the rest of what we're talking about. The percentage of people with improved water resources is a lot lower in the rural communities than it is in the urban communities, but Morocco is currently trying to achieve universal improved water access. So just to put these two maps next to each other, you can see like fairly clearly that most of the Berber people, who are the indigenous people, live in more mountainous regions. And this map is kind of old. This one's from 1973, but it still follows the same sort of distribution that I see on the more current maps. But one reason I really like this one is that it says Tashilhit dialect here. So it sort of breaks up the Amazigh people. So Amazigh and Berber are interchangeable terms. This really kind of shows that the area I was in over the summer is an area that speaks Tashilhit. And this is a map of population density. So you can also see pretty clearly that a lot of the lowlands are way more populated than the mountainous regions. Primarily the mountainous regions are more populated by indigenous people who usually speak their language. A lot of them might not even know Arabic. So more specifically over the summer, I was in Ait Bomran, which, just to go back, is going to be around here, near Tafrout, but, or actually, no, more so here where it turns brown just a little bit there near the coast. And in Ait Bomran, people speak Tashilhit. The majority of people are Muslim. It is a rural area, and the annual rainfall in the area is 112 millimeters a year. So about, not very much at all. But they have 143 days a year where they have intensive fog events. So not very much precipitation at all, but there's a lot of moisture in the air year round. And I wanted to put this picture here because in Eikbomron, if you're not eating, you're about to be. People are very friendly with food everywhere. Every time I entered somebody's home, basically, I was fed something. I was given tea. People are very welcoming, and it's just a huge part of the culture there. So I briefly touched on this a minute ago about the National Water Plan that Morocco has that is kind of like the Sustainable Development Goals, has this pathway between 2015 and 2030. And there's a lot of goals. It's a big document, but some of the goals that this National Water Plan has is to use water more responsibly through changing consumer habits, the valorization of water resources today lost at sea, and the reconstitution of underground water stocks. So basically that means is accessing more water that's lost at sea through various means, maybe runoff that's going directly into the ocean because it is a very coastal area, and replenishing aquifers because around the world we know that groundwater is depleting. And then also the generalization of access to drinking water in rural areas and the sustainability of its financing. This map is from the National Water Plan, and it shows the mobilization of their action. And down here, we see in this area, there's not any sort of anything going on. So in Agadir, which is about 3 hours north of City Ifni, and Tantan, which is about 3 hours south, or maybe not quite that far, from City Ifni, which is the coastal city closest to Eikbomron. We have dams and desalination, but there's really nothing in this area right now. And part of that is because it's so sparsely populated that it's just kind of like on the back burner as far as communities to access water. So this plan really, I'll also say, lays out emphasis on dams, desalination, and wastewater reuse. Those are like the three main focus areas. But fog harvesting is not mentioned actually in the National Water Plan at all. So fog harvesting is something that not a lot of people have heard of, but it is actually a lot more common than you would think. The fog harvesting technology that is used in this area is called the cloud fisher, and it was created by a man named Peter Trautwein, who started an organization called Aquilonus, and he's German, so he actually goes to different countries and helps install these projects. And he was very instrumental in the creation, not just of like he designed this technology himself, but he was very instrumental in the installation of this technology in the different locations that it's used. There are other forms of fog harvesting now. So in addition to the cloud fisher, some of the, I'll say more common, but they're still pretty rare, is this system called Worka water, and they use these Worka water towers. And primarily that's used in Ethiopia. In Israel, there has been a much more sort of active system created, whereas the cloud fisher and the Worka water systems are pretty much passive. In Israel, there's more sort of almost like a dehumidifier for the atmosphere. And then in India, there are some places that use rooftop harvesting. And believe it or not, there is an international fog and dew association that has conferences, not every year, but they exist. Like, it's a thing, and everybody should know that like this is a viable water resource, even if you've never heard of it before. And these are some pictures of the area I was in. These two pictures are actually taken in Agadir, and even though that's not directly where I was, I wanted to show them because these pictures are taken in the same place, just a few minutes apart, so you can really see how much fog comes in. It comes right off the coast, and it can cover the whole area pretty quickly. And so in this picture to the right, this is the Saturday souk in City Ifni where I was. And in this picture, my back is to the sea. So you can see more so all of that fog that's moving inland. And inland from here is where the fog harvesting system is. It's where the Ait-Bomran population is. And here is a small map. This is a few years old, so there's more connections here than there used to be. This infrastructure is connected now to 14 villages, but there are 5 different reservoirs that hold the water that gets collected. A lot of the time it is mixed with groundwater, mostly to get the minerals that are in groundwater, because the fog water is pretty bare. It's just water, even though that's amazing though still. And this is one of the little areas, it's one of the roads I would drive past all the time in one of the villages right here at Ashore. And you can see kind of how the mountain moves. And here's a better image of kind of the whole project. And this concrete block here is one of the reservoirs. And these also kind of curve around a little bit on either side. So my research involved 2 questions, very different, both very important. The first one was, and this was sort of came out of discussion that I had with Darcy Hamad, which is the host organization that operates this. I should have talked about them more. They operate this infrastructure, and they were really looking for a way to quantify the economic impact that these have had. So that I could do a whole PhD on just answering that question, and I could do it so many different ways. But within the time limits that I had, which was 3 months, supposed to be a 2 years master's program, what I wanted to do really to be able to answer that question with the time I had was to find out how people, particularly women, use the time that they used to spend collecting water. So not only do they have this water resource that comes from the fog harvesting system, but it's also piped into their homes. So people have faucets now, and that alone is a huge deal, because on average, women, mostly women, used to spend about 3 hours a day collecting water back and forth, sometimes with a donkey, sometimes without, and that starts to get really heavy. Just the physical strain of that and the time that they use to do that every single day, sometimes in the middle of the night. What are they doing now? How has that time saved really changed the way that they live their lives? Do they make any money now? Are there just things that they don't spend money on that they used to? Or there's so many different things. So I'll get into the methods I used for this more in a moment, but that was the first research question. And the second research question, totally different, was, given that the cloudfishers collect water from the atmosphere, is there a noticeable difference in the relative humidity of the air after it passes through the net? So basically, is there a measurable change in the atmospheric water before and after it goes through? So for the first objective, right, are there noticeable changes in household income, changes in the time use that lead to economic development and the use of water for economic activity now that households receive the fog water? And this is, I'll just say, one of the first big, it is the first big sort of economic study that Darcy Hamad has done with this community, but they have done a lot of different things related to health. They do research all the time. So to do this, I used semi-structured interviews with translators. So I had 3 lovely people, I know at least one of them is here right now, help me by asking my questions to the people who live here. Like I said earlier, a lot of people from the Amazigh communities don't always speak Arabic. So these people did not speak Arabic. The people who get this water generally don't speak Arabic. They just speak Tashilhi. I'm an Arabic student, so even if I there's no way really for me to communicate with them. So I had 3 people who were phenomenal. Sit down, ask questions, try to have like a real open conversation with people, but following the questions that I had come up with. And they took handwritten notes, mostly because I was not given authorization to use recording devices. People view that as kind of intrusive, and I would get more honest answers back without having something like that there. With those interviews, I'm still in the middle of sort of coming up with all my analysis, but I use NVivo, which is a software you can use for coding qualitative data, and then taking the themes, doing a thematic analysis, taking the themes found and connecting those to the relative development that has happened in the community as a result of this. So I'll talk about how I did objective 1. We'll go through that, and then we'll circle back to objective 2 because they're so different. So this is the general concept, and please excuse how this slide is designed, but the general concept is that your time is spent working at a job, working at home, and relaxing. And though all 3 of those have value, not just going to work. The way that just to put it in context, maybe for the audience today, it's, you can spend your money to buy a meal, or you can order takeout, and maybe you're going to spend a lot less money cooking food, but it's going to take you a lot longer. And so there are trade-offs here, but to cook, even if you're not spending very much money, and even if you're not getting paid for it, that can translate into other economic terms, like perhaps the cost of takeout. And leisure, of course, also has its own place. People still want to enjoy their lives, unless you're getting paid a lot. It's, you really can't give up something like sleep, or spending time with your family on Christmas or something like that. There are so many different things that are still valuable to us and can translate into, I'd say now people focus a lot more on mental health than they used to. And the leisure experience can certainly translate into how you value your time, but also the efficiency that you produce in market and domestic work. If you're not getting enough rest, you're not going to be nearly as efficient in those other realms. So some of my expectations going in and doing this research is that 2 things are super common in this area, and that is producing argan oil and harvesting prickly pear. And argan oil is something people go out, they collect the nuts, they crack them at home, they just kind of go. I participated in this a little bit. I got to crack nuts myself, which was really cool, but it's something that women do when they have the time to do it, when they're not too tired. And it is a valuable thing. It's a commodity. And prickly pear as well. I was actually reading that prickly pear is one of the most valuable crops to indigenous communities around the world because it is sold like as fruit, but harvested by indigenous communities and a lot of different places. It's actually indigenous to Mexico. So my expectation was women are going to spend more time producing argan oil and harvesting prickly pear than they used to, given their time. However, I'll say that those were not the things that I found necessarily. The main things that I found related to, a lot of them were related to what I put into the theme physical and mental health, and primarily it's increased sleep. Almost every single person said, I sleep, like as soon as they were asked what they do with their free time. So that also goes back to this idea that a lot of the time women were getting up in the middle of the night, like 2, 3 a.m. and going to get water then. partially because it's not so hot. It's not as hot as it is during the day. But there's that. There's also a lot of reduced stress. So people said like they're not as worried about like anything, because it's this main sort of overglooming concern before was, how are we going to get water? I have to go get it. You know, I can't do anything else all day unless we have water to do it. So that was a big thing. And the physical strain also that was brought up a little bit, the not having to like physically carry water so much, not have to walk back and forth so much. So improved celebrations and leisure was also a big thing. A lot of people talked about weddings and how that's a big deal when you live in a rural area like this and there's not a nightclub to go to, is having a celebration at somebody's home. It's such a big deal. And one thing that people repeatedly talked about was that they used to start gathering water 4 days in advance. And they'd have to get a lot more that, like, in addition to what they needed that day, they needed to have excess. And a lot of people around the community would bring water to the wedding. So that there would be enough water for like all the cooking activities, everybody to have enough to drink, any sort of thing that would need water. And a lot of the times in these contexts, there might be an animal that gets slaughtered. So you need water to sort of handle all these different parts that go into a celebration. And there's also a lot of different contexts where people might spend more time with their family. I even, there's one person who just talked about how she doesn't yell at her kids as much as she used to, because she used to be stressed about everything. But not only that, but she's home when they come home from school. They always know that she's going to be home when they come home from school, and that she's going to have a snack ready for them. And it's not like we're going to come home to an empty house because we're waiting on our mom to come back from gathering water. And then domestic efficiency as well. Some of the things I just talked about with weddings, but in daily life. So water used for cooking. You have a lot more water than you used to, and people clean a lot more often. People feed their livestock sometimes with this water. Sometimes they still use wells for that, but it is common to do in gardens. And I also, I should put on here under physical and mental health is improved hygiene as well. One person said something along the lines of, I shower as much as people in the cities do now. And that was something that they were aware of. And it's just generally having access to this water to be able to clean yourself whenever you feel like it. So a couple of limitations I had to deal with in this research. One is the prickly pear situation right now. And here's sort of a zoomed in picture in this. Maybe you can tell these are supposed to look a lot more perky. And basically there's this, it's this small beetle that has infested pretty much the whole region of prickly pear. And there are different people who are trying to figure out how to deal with it right now. The government sprayed over the whole area that actually had like more negative impacts, but still didn't actually solve this problem. So, and the argan oil harvest that year I heard repeatedly was low. So it's sort of on the cycle where people will let the argan oil or the argan nuts regrow for about 2 years and then harvest them. And then also positive selection bias. So the people who agreed to participate in these interviews were generally just sort of inherently people who were more likely to have had positive experiences. So it's possible that I missed out on hearing on some of the negative experiences that people have had as a result of this project, just because they didn't even want to be interviewed to begin with. So that sort of concludes objective 1 for now. And then the second one, are there changes in relative humidity in the local atmosphere as it passes through a cloud fissure? So to do this, I use these nice little digital hygrometers that I found, and I put them on either side of the net, very close to the net, as to like to prevent other changes, other things like wind or whatever, from changing the the difference in the air, and then took these measurements. Actually, I'm still also in the process of this analysis, but took these measurements and did a paired t-test to see if there was a difference in the humidity before and after. And one of my advisors, Esther Mullins from the geography department, I'll show something that she helped me create with this data in just a minute, but removing days that have low humidity in general, she suggested, because you won't see much change if there's not much happening anyway. And then the removal of spurious temperature. So these machines that are about this big, really, they collect data on temperature and on relative humidity. So she suggested taking out all of the days when the temperature did not line up between the readings, and these took measurements once a minute for about 3 weeks. And here's how it was set up, just going and putting it really close to the net before and after. And I want to talk about the importance of this, and then I'll talk about my results so far. But one of the reasons why this is so important is because there is more water vapor in the atmosphere now than there used to be, primarily because of groundwater extraction and pumping for agriculture. So yes, water is a lot like energy, right? It can't be created or destroyed necessarily, but we have changed how it is located. So sometimes we think, more in climate talks, people talk about how the ice caps will melt. So we have that solid form of water that's then going to become a liquid form of water into the ocean. This is sort of the same process, but instead we have groundwater that's a liquid form under the earth that we're pumping, just like oil, and creating kind of like water vapor emissions. So there's a lot of different studies on that alone and what that means, and what that will lead to for climate change. So some people say that, or have some research says that this is going to lead to sort of a positive feedback, because water vapor is a greenhouse gas, and the more water vapor is in the air, the more the air can heat, and the more the air can heat, the more water vapor can be stored in the air at any given time. Other research says if clouds are formed, that this is going to increase the reflectivity and reflect more heat back into the atmosphere and away from the earth. But it all just depends, and it really depends on the conditions that we're in. But there is an initial change happening that could definitely be going into the first feedback loop, which is that we have more water in the air. Part of this is because of groundwater extraction. Part of this is also because of the interaction water vapor has with other greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. And this is from 2004, that NASA said humidity is one of the primary factors that will influence how much the climate will warm over the next century. How the humidity of the atmosphere will change is of a fundamental importance in predicting future climate. And many more things have been said like this as well, but this just kind of drives the point home that the amount of water vapor that we have in the air is changing, and it is important. And even if it might not stay there, we talk a lot about how hydrological processes are changing, how we have a lot more variability in precipitation. And that is partially because the more water vapor in the air at any given time means that it's moving sort of through this cycle of evapotranspiration and precipitation. And so this is just background. Pretty common illustration of the water cycle. We just know it rains, water evaporates, some of it gets back into the groundwater, some of it turns into just stream runoff, things like that. But a few more things are happening now with the water cycle thanks to humans. One of them is groundwater pumping, that leads to increased evaporation rates. One of them is the oxidation of methane. And when methane is released, eventually it oxidizes in the stratosphere, and this process releases water vapor into the air. And as we increase methane emissions, this process as well is going to increase water vapor. And another one is H2O and CO2. So water vapor plays in significantly to CO2's ability to heat things. And there's a lot of research on that as well. So these are the preliminary findings. Thanks to Esther Mullins for helping me put this graph together. But this is actually just from one of the sites. So the picture I showed you with the two hygrometers on either side of the net, that got done at 3 different sites on the mountain where the fog harvesters are, the cloud fishers are. And so this shows the % decrease in relative humidity from the front to the back. And we see I'm really happy to see most of these things on the positive side, showing about an average of maybe 1.5% decrease in humidity as the air passes through the net. So a couple suggestions from what I found so far. Some of these were given to Darcy Hamad at the end of the summer. One of them was an M&E plan, so a monitoring and evaluation plan with informal indicators that I sort of came up with from the background knowledge that I had on the community. And I just wanted to point out one of those things that was on here. And this would be a way for them to show economic development in the context of the community rather than simply in like a dollar form, because for one, the informal community rules in this area. There are people who have jobs and get paid and pay taxes on an income that comes from a paycheck, but the informal economy dominates in this area. So that means we need informal indicators. And one of those that I suggested to them was keeping account of new houses that are being built. So this first picture over here is just walking through one of the villages that we did interviews in one day. And this house was there. So it's literally being built against these other houses. So there's a clear difference in the older houses and the newer houses. And here's just another one that was around. And there are a lot of new houses being built. So to me, that means people have some money to build a new house with, and that's worth keeping track of. So in addition to some of the monitoring and the indicators that should be kept track of, I also suggested to Darcy Hamad that they complete a business training that would help the beneficiaries in this community learn more about how they could engage with the economy formally, how they could make money, maybe how they could start their own business, things like that. Because if this is a goal of theirs to show that people are making more money, then it goes to show that it's probably a goal of theirs to help them make more money. Another thing that is not necessarily in the realm of Darcy Hamad, but has to do with the cost comparison and the economic impact that this has is if it could be the infrastructure costs could be compared with the infrastructure costs of desalination, and put that to a metric that maybe per liter, the cost relative to each different kind of technology, because desalination is really big, but it's also really expensive. And then as far as the ecological research suggestions, a scaled study of what I did would be amazing. I wish I could do only that. I wish that I could go back and take a bunch of machines and do this all over again, and do it for longer. Because one thing also is that I did this over the summer, which is the off season for the fog. There's a lot more fog in the colder months. And just generally more research needs to be done on the impact that fog harvesting has in the environment, because there's not very much on it at all. And even though that's kind of why I decided to do this, is that I was getting questions from people when I was talking about this, about what the impact is. And I was having a lot of trouble finding any literature on it. So the implications that this has, right, we talked about Morocco's national water plan and how it does not include fog harvesting in it at all. So perhaps for their next plan, which who knows exactly when that will be written, or just even now to have the government explore more the viability of this technology. And within the National Water Plan, they have a strategic management plan. So the possibility of creating a working group related to this site that's already exists. There's already a lot of people involved with it. If they could somehow link that into the National Water Plan framework. And then as well, just general more research needs to be done on the scaling of this infrastructure, on the impacts that it has on the atmosphere around it, how the reduction of water vapor locally could affect climate change locally, how the reduction of water vapor in the air globally could impact or even reverse some of the things that we've already happened. We talk a lot about CO2 emissions, but I don't think I've ever had a class where somebody talked about water vapor emissions. And it really is a big deal for climate change. So there's also this concept of water diversification and redundancy as a water security method to diversify access that has like historically all been focused on groundwater and surface water and is now moving into seawater, but very, very rarely do we talk about atmospheric water and redundancy. So diversifying the methods by which we get water and then reproducing them. And fog harvesting should definitely be reproduced in as many places as possible. And these are actually, because there's people who come to Tropilunch who are working all over the world, I thought it would be interesting for everybody else, and also just to show the importance of this, the global importance. Fog harvesting collection projects have been undertaken in many countries, including Chile, Cape Verde, Eritrea, Guatemala, Nepal, Morocco, Peru, Namibia, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Azerbaijan, Ethiopia, Oman, Israel, Colombia, Yemen, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, and the Canary Islands. And this map is on the Aqualonis website, the organization that Peter Trotwin started, of different locations that have been researched for fog observations to see how viable they might be. This specifically, the fog or the cloudfisher might be in these locations. And I think we have just, I wanted to wait until the end to do this, and I think we have just enough time. This is a video that will show, this is a PBS video, I believe, or I can't see actually right now, of how the cloudfishers work, because I'm sure everybody is really confused about that. All right, so that is all I have for you guys, but of course, we'll open it to questions. I'll ask the first one, which is how much water did these nets harvest? That's what everybody always wants to know. And the technical answer at the moment with this iteration of the technology is that each square meter of net can collect 21 liters of water a day, given the right conditions.